Africa was originally spelled with the K before it was colonized. When you know and understand your history as a people, it helps to shape your identity. As African people, many times we have been told that our history started off in slavery in the Americas. But what was our history before Africans were kidnapped and put into chattel slavery during the antebellum period in America? Before there was African American history, there was ancient African history. And what was our history before Africa was actually called Africa?
Ancient African people functioned within dynasties. They were within clans. Later, as Europeans kidnapped African people, they named them as tribal people. African people did not start out from the beginning as being called tribal people. And so once African people came into the various places of the world, they was brought in by so-called discoverers and invaders, people who was masquerading as missionaries. And supposedly they said that they were coming in to the nations to civilize the people. But ancient African people was highly civilized people. They were very academic people and very well educated people. So civilization was something that they was not lacking.
There is a debate in history that civilization began in Europe and or in Rome, really, that the Romans came to Africa or the Europeans came to Africa to civilize our people. And first of all, that's incorrect. I mean, that's incorrect. We had prime civilizations in Mali and Timbuktu and in Egypt and some of the great kingdoms of Africa. We descend from kings and queens. We descend from the origination or the originators of mathematics, of language. And again, I say propaganda and narrative because, you know, even the term Middle East, you know, the term Middle East, well, when I was growing up, there was no term Middle East. Middle East is North Africa. it's Northern Africa, right? And so from there, we are the builder of the pyramids. We are the establishers of the Hammurabi Code, where we get most of our laws. We're the establishers of all those profound inventions and profound ingenuities in that we still kind of utilize or intimate in civilization with regards to from the Fertile Crescent and Mesopotamia, all those different places, the Euphrates. Those are African-based things.
I've actually been reading a book. It's called The Destruction of Black Civilization, and it talks about the powerful tribes that were in Africa and how they were all lined up along the Nile River. You know, how they started irrigation, how aqueducts were started in Africa. You know, like these people took a land that was very bad, you know, like land that most people probably could not grow crops on, and found a way to do it.
As Black people in America, we've been so indoctrinated with other people's story, and we've allowed them to condition our minds to accept that as if that's our history. We haven't been taught history. So when we're actually saying African history, we're actually saying world history, namely the Nile Valley. And this is not me saying this is scientific fact, this is historical fact. Egypt stands today, meaning our monuments stand there and they've stood the test of time, whereas other cultures have gone and went and died. Egypt is still there. Now, it's not in the control of the original people of that land, which, you know, look like myself. We're not identifying with where we're really from. But, you know, Egypt itself is considered the mother of civilization. And when that is, you have to think of what happens in a civilization. You have math, you have science, you have architecture, things of that nature. And this is actual fact. And it's a conscious effort to separate us as Black people in America from our ancestry. And that's done on purpose, because if we were to know the great things that we did in the past, I mean, our future is limitless.
Africa was not named Africa originally. It was named Abutilon. And this is what the name was. And so when the European people came in, such as Arab people, Asians, they renamed a lot of things. And so Africa was very a dynamic continent. And I don't see that Africa would be anything that anyone would frown and look down upon, because of all of the people and how dynamic they were and the resources there. All of the diamonds, the gold, the copper, the silver, and in particular salt. And salt was a very valuable mineral during that time, and that was because of African people being in the sun.
We need to realize how important our skin is, why God created us to look the way we look. God created us. The way we're created, melanin is very important.
Melanin is a human normal. It's a normative. It's a genetic normative. Having no melanin is an abnormality. Right? So you can't stand the sun. You get sunburn. We get the energy from the sun. Right? So the narrative, the true narrative history doesn't always work to those who came out of mountains, out of caves. The true narrative of history works for those of us who were embraced by the sun, whose skin soak up the vitamin D in the sun, whose skin don't burn. That you see what I'm saying? That we begin, the darker we are, the more we radiate.
We as Moors, black Africans, came into Europe and we civilized them, meaning we taught them burial rites, how to bury the dead, how to, women how to clean themselves and menstrual cycles. And at that time, if you study Europe, you would see pictures of castles like you see in these movies. They make Europe like it was such a beautiful place, but actually outside those castles, there was moats, which was filth because they didn't have a sewer system, and the people would literally throw the waste out. And then they would wear big giant boots on their feet because there was so much waste and things in the streets. Well, when the Moors came in, we actually civilized them and brought them up to a higher standard of living. What happened in return was, after they came up that higher standard of living, they actually turned on us.
So I've got to make sure that I make Africa scary, because that's a rich place. And so when history tells the story, I didn't go and take it from an intelligent people who had their own system of law, had their own culture, had their own families. I can then say in history that we conquered the land of savages.
When the Europeans came to Africa and began to capture slaves, they didn't just walk in and defeat these great warriors. They talked to rival tribes. They talked to their chiefs. As a matter of fact, we learned in my history class that they would have to go to the chief of the African tribe, and they would have to beg on hands and knees, on all fours, and beg them to acknowledge their existence. They would beg, they would trade, and then that king, or the leader of that tribe, would then sell them slaves. They would give them slaves. That leader of that tribe did not know that they were going to come to America and be treated completely different as a slave, because in Africa, when they had slaves, it was not based on your race. There was no race. Race is a fairly new concept. It's socially constructed. It's not real, but Europeans have made race to divide and conquer. So they would go to Africa and they would have these slaves, and they would just be people who were conquered in war. They had lost a battle, they had lost a war, so they became slaves. The slaves in Africa were treated with dignity and respect. They were fed well, they were clothed well, they never separated family members, they would never sell a father from his wife or from his children, because there were no racial stereotypes, because there was no race. They come to America and it's a completely different story.
First of all, we must understand, as black people, we have been taught that we're a tribal people, but we are not tribal, we are communal. Now, we understand that when the Africans came over here into America and the offsprings of them, we came from different tribes. And from these different tribes were different cultures of that tribe. But every tribe, their nature was communal.
But I've got to control the narrative to make sure that when I start pillaging and raping, the things that's going on in the Congo, with Leopold and all those different kind of people that stripped the people and, barbarized, that was not something that happened in Africa, but that was something that came from Europe. But I've got to make it seem like that was happening in Africa to legitimize my barbarity. I've got to legitimize my violence and my vitriol against this people, and unfortunately, it has lasted till this day.
Europeans need blacks. You didn't see any Africans come to America saying that they needed Europeans to do their labor for them. It was the other way around. Africans were self-sufficient. We were doing just fine where we were at. We didn't need to go get anybody else to come build our country for us. We built it on our own. So once they realized that our people are starting to take notice of the fact that they need us a lot more than we need them, it's going to be crazy. This fear of black retaliation is not new.
A Caucasian person who can be a very good person, nothing, God-fearing, but they see the chocolate in our skin. They see our darkness. They clutch, they fear. We can be walking down the street minding our own business, and they fear our skin. They fear where we come from. They see us with a spear in our hand, not a crown on our head. And again, it's the narrative. So that they can go in there and take and rape our gold, our salt, our diamonds, our tungsten, all of the rich mineral. There is no other continent on the face of the planet that is as rich today as Africa. They're not afraid of Africa, but they want you to think that they are. So you in your conscience can say they've got a right to go and conquer these dark people.
Egypt has influenced the world in every aspect, you follow what I'm saying? Especially the United States government, because you can go to the Capitol, you can go to Washington, D.C., and you're going to see Egyptian symbols. They call it Washington's Monument. It's an obelisk. There has to be some reason why the people that laid this foundation of this country puts Egyptian symbols on the dollar bill. They had to know something. So obviously the ones who have been in power know who we are. We cannot decode the mystery.
The wealthiest man of all time in the history of the world was Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, and he was worth $4 trillion. That's more than Bill Gates, Donald Trump, Oprah Winfrey, all of them combined. $4 trillion off the gold trade in Africa. He ruled Africa. We're not taught about him. You don't hear about him. They don't want you to learn about him, because then you get a sense of pride.
Egypt plays the most important role in us because, for the most part, if you look at black people, especially us in America, one thing we have in common is we have a lot of religion. And we like to think we're different, whether we say we're Muslim or a Christian or this type of Christian or that type of Christian. But the Bibles that we're reading, the Qurans that people are reading, one thing they have in common is Egypt. And Egypt gives validity to these religions because all the great men of renown in these books, from Abraham to Moses on down to Jesus, all went to Egypt. Egypt is recognized through world history and even through religious philosophy as a place of knowledge. So therefore, the religions that we practice today, if we were actually to research, we'll see the concepts come out of Egypt, from the concept of a Christ concept or a Savior concept, or even what is done in Mecca today, where the Muslims make their pilgrimage. These same rituals, you can look on the walls of Egypt, and they were done 5,000 years prior to 1,400 years ago. So Egypt has influenced the world in every aspect.
When you talk about the Coptic Church or the Coptic Orthodox Church or the Egyptian Orthodox Church, founded by the Apostle Mark, who was documented to be a dark-skinned Jew from that area, right? Mm-hmm. So it's imperative for us to understand that the Coptic Church is the oldest Christian church, is the oldest church, not the Roman Church, not any of the streams or any of the branches of the Holy Catholic Church, not Roman Catholic, but you have the Eastern Orthodox, the Western Orthodox stream, those who, where we can trace those who are church leaders, apostles. There's a new thing now about, well, not new thing, but apostolic succession flowing from either of those two streams, the Western stream or the Eastern stream. Mm-hmm. It's very important for us to understand that predating all of that is the Coptic Church, where what Christianity does not do, and what I also talk about the Hotep brothers, what Christianity does not do, and what Mark sought not to do, was discredit the fact that there were other god worship. There were other god worships in Africa, in Egypt, in Alexandria, to be more specific, which again is Africa. That that they acknowledged that. The same way that there was worship of Zeus, there was worship in Diana and Ephesus and all those other places. So Jesus never told them, or the gospel message or Christianity is never the wiping away of anybody's journey to coming to know God. They acknowledged God. Egyptian religion acknowledged a God and several gods. The scriptures acknowledge other gods. There would be no other reason for him to say there shall be no other gods before me if even the Most High was not recognizing that there were other gods, right? So when they came in, they recognized that they believed in the afterlife, or what we consider to be eternal life or resurrection. They believed that there was a life after death. So what Mark did was bring them to an understanding when he began to preach the gospel over in Egypt, to bring them to an understanding that the gods which you worship is found, the path to that God. He's one God. He's not the God, he's not Ra, he's not, this one Osiris, he's not that one, he's not that one, he's not that one, he's not that one, but he's one. And that one God has represented himself in Jesus Christ. And Mark begins to preach to these Egyptians, and they begin to be saved, or what we call claim salvation, or believe in Jesus Christ. Well, they then began to found the original church. So the original church was not established in Rome. The original church is not European. The original Christian church, the oldest, and that remains today, is the Coptic Orthodox Church, right? And so what I think sadly our brothers don't understand is they have believed the propaganda and the narrative of the European, which is that Christianity was founded in Europe, and that Christianity is a slave religion, the white man's religion. Well, see, they do the very exact same thing as it relates to, they buy into the propaganda, and they create an ideology that's against truth. Because the truth of the matter is that the origination of the church, in its founding, the origination was started by dark people. These are African people. These are not Europeans. The only reason why the Europeans, painted Jesus that looks like them, so that they could have representation and control. It was a political move.
The modern day Egyptians are not the ancient African Egyptians. The African people of Kemet valued their history so much that they wrote it in stone so that their history could not be rewritten. Many have tried to unfold their secrets and mysteries, but they can't decode the message that is written in stone. The ancient Africans were of great mysteries.
People back during the ancient time, as I said before, was very well educated people. They set up schools that was called mystery schools, which are now what we call colleges and universities. And when a child became the age of 7 years old, they left home and went into the mystery school. And they stayed there for about 33 and sometimes 40 years. They went in at 7 years old, and approximately 40 years old is when they left. And when they went into the school, they was trained and versed in all subjects. They began study as priests, engineers, doctors, lawyers, dancers, poets, mathematicians, any type scientists you could name, and they was medical doctors. And one of the prime medical doctors that was back during that time, and he was versed in all fields, was Imhotep. Okay, he is the same person of which the father of medicine names himself Hippocrates, claims that he's the father of medicine. But medication and surgeries and all sorts of things was done back during that time, because ancient African people was trained during that time to do these type things. And so they were not slaves and people that was not well educated.
A profound mysticism comes out of Egypt. Now, all of Africa is mystical in terms, because of the depth of its darkness, the depth of its richness, the depth of its language. But Egypt is where we have pictographs, we have walls, we have pyramids. How did they build these pyramids? First of all, there are more pyramids in the world than Egypt, than in Gaza, right? There's some in China, there's some in South America. But all of these have the same level of architecture in terms of, so you even had African function in all those, in what we consider to be Asian countries and South American countries. You had all that going on as well. But I think Egypt still is looked upon as the prime civilization, the mysterious civilization. The how did they do that civilization?
Egypt original name was Kemet. So when European people came in, they renamed Kemet Egypt, and so that is where Egypt received the name from. And Kemet means black. The people, the original people of Egypt were black people. They were not Caucasian people, Arab people, or Asians, or whatever the nationalities who would lay a claim. So Kemet was a very highly civilized place, very well schooled, very academic place. Okay, and so we had what you call the mystery schools, the philosophers such as Socrates and Plato, Aristotle. They did study in Africa at the mystery schools. But when they left Africa, they tried to take the information and knowledge with them, but the mystery schools were set up that the information was mostly secret, and most of it was not written. And so when they traveled the world and tried to use the same information, they didn't really have all of the details to it and couldn't do that.
Purely intimidated and fear of, what if these people truly realize what they're capable of? What if they, I won't say realize, but what if they remember where they came from? What if they remember that they started education? What if they remember that the first university was in their motherland, was at Timbuktu? What if they remember that our European ancestors came to Africa to learn how to do mathematics? That our Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Socrates, came to Africa, again to Timbuktu, to get knowledge from the Africans, to learn how to do things. That's what they fear, is that one day we will wake up from this slumber that we've been in for so long, and we'll say, I'm great. I made this. I am truly powerful.
What I like to point out to people, the difference in society today and ancient society is that it was matriarchal in the past, meaning the woman was in her proper place. Meaning today we, through religious indoctrination, through namely the three monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, it became patriarchal, and subtly the woman was taken out of her place as being the leader or sitting on a throne, because every pharaoh had a woman sitting next to them. And the way we lived in that society was we had the woman in her proper place and we had the man next to her, so there was a duality, there was a balancement, and thus the society was lived under the principle of what's called ma'at, which is balancement. Everything had to be balanced.
Women during that time was considered goddess. Okay, if a woman is a goddess, then she's the queen, and sometimes she had the title of pharaoh. So how could a person be a goddess if she didn't have her god, and that was her husband, the king? And so during those years, you had black women who was on high levels, high status women, and they was not looked down on, talked down to, and that's because black women were seen as carrying the seed of the nation. Queen Ninja, she was a dynamic person, and she was a warrior. She led the military, and she was really feared by a lot of nations, and that's because she was the type person that what we would call today as a take no mess type person. And when she came into a land, the people knew that she was coming into the land, and they knew when she left. And the European people didn't respect her. And so the people of which she ruled over knew the power that she had. And I can remember a story being told about some of the historians where she went in and talked to this very powerful king, and when she arrived there, he would not allow her to sit. He was sitting, had his subjects sitting, people in the room sitting, and wouldn't give her a chair. So what her people did was they got down on all fours, and she sat down on them, and they braced themselves as if they was a chair.
Queen Nefertiti, she was one of the first queens to start serving one god. You know, before Queen Nefertiti, they were they polyreligious. They had several gods. They praised 10, 12 different gods. You know, a god for a sun god, who they called Ra. They had all types of different gods. But Nefertiti said, no, there is but one God. She changed religion in a whole. You know, to us now that's a norm. So we're like, you know, of course she praised one God. But then that was unprecedented. She changed religion as we know it.
Queen Hatshepsut, who was actually a pharaoh. And she's so important because through her rule, which is they estimate was over 20 years, Egypt was at peace, meaning it was not being invaded. You follow what I'm saying? And the architecture, it thrived, and a lot of the monuments and temples still stand today. You follow what I'm saying? And this was under the rule of a woman. Women, in, like I said, in ancient African history, and I like to use the word African when dealing with Egypt, because now they're trying to separate and say, well, there's Africa, but then there's Egypt. So in ancient African history, women have always played a very important part because the woman is the first teacher, meaning our first knowledge, our information comes by way of a woman.
When we understand who we are and where we come from an epistemological standpoint, it will reframe our psychology as Black people. I think when you have no sense of source, you have no source of sense, right? So when you have no sense of where you come from, then you have no mentality, you have no conscious development, you have no place from which to pull your value.